Good afternoon. My name is Xavier Gavarrell. I be the chairman of the session, the last one about impact. This is the academic practice session. We have two exciting speakers today, and also co-authors will be here with us for the questions. Before to start, I take the opportunity to show my congratulations with the organizers. On behalf of the Institute and the Maria de Maezto unit, I like to offer them these roses. They come from my community garden at home. This is an online conference. So here you have the roses and my congratulations for your work. Let's start the session. The first speaker is Lorena Graf Pérez de la Vega. She comes from my institute, Institute of Environmental Science and Technology, ICTA-UAB, and she will present a case study on its project impact. Lorena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for being here. My name is Lorena, and with the advice of Victoria Reyes and Andre Junqueira, my thesis tutors and Lychee core team members, I'm going to present the Lychee Project as a case study related to carbon footprint of scientific activities. Well, researchers are often unaware of the environmental impact of their professional activities. This is even the case for those studying climate change impacts. However, those scientific activities such as traveling, commuting to work or teleworking, and use of internet, within others, can have relatively large carbon footprint. And it is not clear whether some of these activities have an academic impact, but calculating the emissions is an important first step to understand the impact of scientific community. And then some institutes and universities, such as Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, are taking action to reduce their environmental impacts by focusing, for example, on their infrastructure or travel model. Scientists should align our discourse with our practices in order to set an example for the society and to find another ways to mitigate the impacts and reduce the emissions. Okay. Within this context, the main objective of this case study is to quantify the greenhouse gases emissions associated to Lychee Project and model changes associated with two potential mitigation scenarios, the soft one and the hard scenario. And by conducting this work, we aim to raise awareness within the scientific community regarding the carbon footprints of our activities, and foster also similar initiatives to quantify carbon emissions of research projects as first step to reduce and mitigate them. It is not in the aim of this project to quantify whether there is a relation between academic impact and carbon emissions for now, because this relation is quite hard to measure. Okay, so why we thought that Lychee Project is a good example as a case study? It's basically because the Lychee Project is an ERC-funded project, which means European Research Council funded project, that aims to bring insights of indigenous and local knowledge to international climate change research and negotiations. So this project is based on a network of researchers spread all over the world, involving a lot of traveling. However, despite the scientific goals related to climate change and Lychee researchers' commitment to the environment, the design of the Lychee Project didn't include an evaluation of the potential carbon impact of the project activities when started. It is important for me to share the similar studies because, we based our research and calculations in previous work that has already addressed the issue. For example, as you can see here in the first paper, led by Seth Wines of the University of British Columbia, the name is Academic Air Travel has a limited influence on professional success, which details a methodology to calculate carbon emissions from travel. And we have another one. This second is interesting because, well, this was led by Joachim Sears. I don't know if I'd say correctly, but the name of this paper is Carbon Footprint of Academic Air Travel, a case study in Switzerland, which finds that simple measures such as restricting to economy class or replacing short trips by train and avoiding layovers already have the potential to reduce emissions by 36% of the total emissions. And another, this third paper, it's a background study that, well, the name is Carbon Footprint Science More Than Flying, written by Wouter M.J. Ashton, Joanna Almeida, and Bar Mice, which brings to light aspects other than travel that should be considered when calculating the carbon footprint of science, such as infrastructure, video conferencing, or energy consumption and providers for the web page. So importantly, all these studies suggest that academic results can be maintained at the same time that we reduce carbon emissions. Okay, here you have the methodology that we use, and we calculated the Lychee carbon emissions between November 2018 to December 2019. And the members of the team included in the study were 10 people from the core team and 40 partners who made in total 80 trips related to training events in Barcelona, fieldwork, conference, or workshops. And we calculated the emissions related to 3 categories. As you can see here in the table, the categories were travel, teleworking, internet use, and in 3 scenarios: business as usual, soft mitigation scenario, and hard mitigation scenario. The first one is the business as usual, shows the real emissions generated by the project. And this includes bringing all the 40 partners for training to Barcelona and multiple travels of the core team members to the conference and fieldwork, almost all of them by plane. Also, that includes daily commuting to ICTA building, where is the office work, and the use of internet, including some video calls and website storage. The second scenario is the soft mitigation scenario and shows the potential to reduce the emissions from travel by favoring the train, decentralized training in 5 cities closer to partner location. And I'm going to show you the map with those cities are Barcelona, Delhi, Nairobi, Sao Paulo, and New York. Also, this soft mitigation scenario includes increase home office by 20% and changing the website to a green provider. And finally, we have the hard mitigation scenario that shows the potential to reduce the emissions with more strict rules. For example, in this scenario, in addition to the measures implemented in the soft mitigation scenario, we calculated emissions as if we had done the partner training just online, and also increased homework, but now to 80%, and changed the website to a green provider. Okay. Well, here are the results and the general results, because as you can see in the first graph, the Lychee project emitted almost 140 tons of carbon dioxide, And the orange line shows the potential to reduce emissions. So the soft mitigation scenario has 30% of reduction potential, while the hard mitigation scenario has the potential to reduce 72% of the total emissions. And this second graph shows an analysis by categories, and the travel, it's obvious that the travel is the most emission generating category, following by the teleworking and then the internet use. Well, if we go deeper with results by category, we can see these graphs. And the first one is the emissions from travel, and shows that implementing strategies such as favoring train travel, decentralizing partner training, and selecting participation in scientific events can reduce 40% of the total emissions here. And well, however, online partner training, as we can see in the hard mitigation scenario, the potential reduction increased to 75%. And this is, well, generating just 32 tons of CO2 from travel. And then the second graph shows the category of teleworking, which means that, well, commuting to office emitted 6.43 tons of carbon dioxide. The soft mitigation scenario, which involves an increase of home office by 20%, for each member of the core team, can reduce 29 of the total emissions, while hard mitigation scenario, which involves an increase of home office by 80%, can reduce almost 71% of the total emissions of this category. And here we have the last graph, the internet use category. And this is the category with the lowest environmental impact. But notice that in the hardest scenario, the impact is bigger because we substituted the face-to-face training for online training sessions. And this raises the importance to consider trade-offs and adopting different scenarios. And talking about trade-offs, here we have a table that shows some of the potential trade-offs among carbon emissions, economic cost, and academic impact that researchers should consider when selecting between scenarios. For example, I don't know, reducing emissions from giving training online to the partners will reduce carbon emissions and costs, but it may have an impact on quality of the sessions as they are not conducted face-to-face. Also, or I don't know, when we reduce the dioxide, well, the emissions and the environmental impact of commuting by increasing home office, the emissions from streaming increase, and maybe we will have a moderate or high shifting of office costs to employees. And the last example is if we favor the travel by train, we will generate less emissions, but economic costs may increase. Also, the cost of changing the route of flights to more direct flights may increase. So in this study, we have so far focused on carbon emissions, but our next step to the near future is to go deeper into quantifying economic and academic impacts associated to each of the three scenarios. And well, the travel is the category generating the most emissions in the Lychee project, as we saw in the graphs. The internet use is the only category that doesn't have potential reduction due to the implementation of partner training online. Also, it is important for the researchers to think about how much is going to cost the implementation of mitigation strategies, thinking about, I don't know, monetary, environmentally, and scientifically. And also researchers are more and more getting used to work remotely, cooperating with people from other countries via internet, for example. And so academic impact of working more from home and traveling less should be probably low. We think so. And the conclusion, this case study illustrates that academic activities have a huge potential for carbon emissions reduction. The Lychee Project could have saved 37% to 72% of its carbon emissions if researchers had done a carbon emission assessment before the start of the project. And so that's why it's important to have, or well, we recommend that carbon footprint assessment should be included as part of proposals presentation to minimize the carbon footprint of academic activities. Also, we think that it could be really nice if funding agencies should condition funding to the elaboration of a carbon footprint plan for any research project. So that's all, and I would like to thank all the Lychee core team for their support and for providing me all the data needed. And also I would like to thank all of you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to hear your feedback and to take any question.
Thank you, Lorena. We have several questions.
Okay.
Also, in the chat, Petra helped you and has answered the first one. So we can move to the second. Did you calculate level 1 carbon footprint or more?
Sorry?
So we can move to the second question that is made by Ralph. Did you calculate level 1 carbon footprint or more?
Level 1 carbon footprint? Yes.
Or yes, you can combine these questions with the following one. How do you calculate emissions associated with the commuting to the office?
Okay. For example, each member of the core team filled in a table the days that they go to the office and, well, the means of transportation they use, and also the distance to get there to the office. And then we use the carbon footprint calculator, which use eco-invent emission factors. And well, the calculations of emissions from fuels, for example, for commuting, are scope 1. This means that, well, the direct greenhouse gases emissions and from the combustion of each fuel, depending of which kind of fuel is used.
And also, Cristina is asking, how did you calculate the distance of the flight?
Okay. We used web page named Grade Mapper Distance. Is an official, and we did a research to know that it's a good tool. And this have the distance between an airport to another airport or between stations, different stations.
So André is interested in considering the different social and cultural environments Lychee operates. What was the reaction of partners to these implementations?
Well, I think they are really motivated to implement these measures, but I don't know if maybe it can cause the quality of the sessions. But well, this is a measure that we should take to reduce the emissions. I don't know exactly what they think, but it's interesting to know.
Does you compare your values, your results with other projects, European projects or national projects?
Yes, actually, I don't know if you remember the second article that I mentioned was saying that with some specific measures, no, with some specific strategies, the travel we can reduce the emissions from travel to 36%. And in our case, the results is the same, is almost the same results. So, and also we compare different methodologies and with the carbon footprint tool to know if we are in the same page. And yes, I think so. You can see the calculations if you want to ask me.
And do you think that all the people in the team has the same contribution in the carbon footprint?
No, exactly, because some member of the core team travels more than others, and also not everyone goes to the office. So the commuting is not the same. Also because some of them goes by car and some of them goes by bicycle, and I don't know.
And how do you manage the situation? Do you think you should split this contribution between people? I'm referring to the members of the group to share or not. Have you discussed it within the group?
Yes, we have discussed that, but I think we are thinking as a team, as a group, Lychee Project. So as far no, I don't know if we're gonna think of go more deeper if it on each member. I don't know. Maybe just work as a group.
So the chat is hot, and Christina and other people are answering, and because she's interested in the how do you manage the flies? If you do every fly by fly using programming or not? If you can explain again this part, or in aggregated model.
The methodology to calculate the emissions from travel?
Directly from the flight.
From the flight. Okay, well, we use the distance from one airport to another airport, and I had the database of each travel, of each trip, and I counted like from one point to other point, the distance, and then multiply for the radiation force, that is 1.9. And then also I multiply the emission factor, which is in the first paper I mentioned, of wines, yes, of the University of British Columbia. So
can I do another question from Julia? Do you think after COVID and all the adaptation of the academic sector to the other means, such as virtual conference like this one, there will be a change in academic practice and their footprint, especially flies? This is from Julia.
Well, yes, I don't know, but I think that now we are getting more used to have a teleconference, or like this, like here we are doing a virtual conference. So maybe it would have an impact reducing the emissions. Yes. I hope so.
Okay, I think that congratulations for your presentations. Thank you. And we can move to the second speaker.
Thank you.
Our second speaker is Soren Thompson, but this is a choral presentation with Digwell and Ibukun here in the table, and they can answer questions too. They come from Geomar Helmut Center for Ocean Research in Kiev, Germany. I'm sure that Soren and co-authors are well known for you, as Soren has been very active these days in the chat and the bar. So, Soren, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And also thank you for the nice introduction and for organizing this amazing conference. So my talk will, I think, be less scientific than most of the others, but so one could maybe see us, our team, which you can see here, and there are a lot of other people involved, more as some kind of practitioners of virtual communication. So the title of the talk is Getting to Less, How to Decarbonize Earth and Ocean Science Conferences. So this is work Milan did, and I think we all know that CO2 emissions from international conferences are quite high. And Milan calculated this here for the AGU meeting, which is an American Geophysical Union meeting every year at the West Coast most of the time. And there are about 26,000 people flying to the US, and this creates the same amount of emissions as if you would travel with the plane to the sun and back almost. And what is important, however, to mention is, and often missing, is that often we encourage people to take the train or use this kind of transport to visit international conference when possible, but we have to acknowledge that most of the time, and because of the distribution of the people, and here it's just 2% of the flights could be substituted by trains. So just 2% of the emissions come from short-haul flights below 1,500 kilometers. And so this numbers is changing, of course, depending which conference you're looking at. But for example, for the EGU, which is actually happening this time also virtually at the same time, and also in this week in Vienna normally, there the short-haul flights make up 13.6% of, although a large portion of the people are actually coming from Europe. And so that points to the importance of really alternatives to these long distance flights. And typically these meetings grow. So we have 6% annual growth, for example, for the EGU meeting. And this means, so if we manage to get all scientists coming from Europe to Vienna by train, which is encouraged a lot by the organizers, that means in 2 years we will have eaten up our success already just by the annual growth of the participants. So that means we really need virtual conferencing and this kind of formats you're doing here to really decarbonize international conferences. So that's another big topic why we think virtual conferencing needs much more attention, and this is diversity. If you look at these two meetings, for example, the EGU and the AGU meeting, they are extremely highly non-diverse. So, and exclusive. This is simply because it's very expensive to go to these meetings, to have to pay the flight, the hotel, and all these things. So at the EGU, for example, just 2% of the attendees come from countries which are not very or very high or very high on the Human Development Index. And the share of the low developed index people basically from is just at 0.1, and this didn't change for the last 8 years at all. And the very slow progress in increasing diversity is mainly due to the increase of participation from China and for India. And we checked also, or Milan did that too, he checked also how this compares to the AGU meeting 2019, and this distribution is almost the same. So that means there are two big problems we have with international conferencing. And despite these huge problems we have, the science community needed actually a deadly virus to finally act at scale, which I personally find quite sad. And some conferences are also now simply cancelled actually and postponed to next year. So basically going back to business as usual. Some are rescheduled and some go virtual like this one, which I think is really great. And I think now there's time for the first poll, which we want to do. So Anna, could you please start it? So the question is, so we want to understand, in comparison to last year, do you find it necessary to attend conference meeting in person? Okay, so for now, the numbers bouncing around. So we have 0 for much less, 0 for a bit more. We have about 32% right now, about the same. Then 41% for less. And I will end the poll now. So that means we have 66% actually who say less or way less. So that is an interesting result, I think, because it might point to the fact that maybe people will go less to international conferences after this COVID experience. We organized during the COP in Madrid, we organized the virtual Blue COP. And one idea actually to do this was to basically show that it's possible to organize a virtual gathering around this COP. And in the upper front, you can see the organizer team, which was a very diverse group of people, and also Dwight, Anna, and Ibukun, and are also on the pictures if you look carefully. And then below you can see parts of the people from the participants. And it was a very successful exercise. And we had speakers from around the world. We did a webinar series before the COP, and then we did 24 hours. We went around the globe during the COP, and the idea was also just to raise awareness about the topic the ocean plays actually in the climate system. And yeah, this conference, I would say, was quite successful. We were not enough people, I would say, to make it as great as this conference. And we are also not that experienced. And given that we were not in a pandemic, we had actually struggled also to get people into the virtual space. And this is something we have to consider when the Corona time is over. People will be busy again, they will be in planes, so it will be very hard again to get people back into the virtual space, which is one of the biggest challenges of virtual communication. Then there's another project. I found it about 1.5 years ago after my research stay in Senegal. And this where I realized that there were very few talks actually, or international scientific talks in the lab in Senegal. So I, together with my colleagues from Senegal and around the world, we were thinking, how can we change that? And so we created a webinar series, which is called Evas webinars. And there we invite every 3 to 4 weeks people like you do here in the web, in the web space. And then we stream the videos on YouTube, and the labs can tune in. And this is a very specific scientific topic about the so-called upwelling systems. And we do it just every, as I said, every few weeks, and it's very short in time. So it's a different format. And I think it's a very appealing format because normally people are struggling to fit in a virtual conference in their schedule. And like this, you have also continuous engagement, and you can really overbuild a community over longer time. So what we do, in Germany it's at about it's at 5 in the afternoon, and in the US it's in the morning, or in Peru and Chile people are having lunch, and you can see the picture there. And we asked actually the people to have it a little bit more social, to stream the webinars in the labs of the research institutes, and that works quite well. So they only put YouTube video on, they put it on the beamer, and they use some speakers, and then they can watch together, which is quite nice. And here we have about way more people from the southern countries, which was often the 0.1% of the other conference. So you are reaching a totally different community actually, and we have this distribution all the time. So it's actually our biggest challenge is to get the busy Western scientists on board, and to not only let them present their work, but also join the discussions and reserve this time and join this important discussion. So this is our largest challenge, but we are still quite happy, and because this, no one is left behind. And I think especially as this research topic is about these regions, it's about Peru, Chile, West Africa, it doesn't make sense at all to have a person meeting where this community is not there. So that's why I decided to just go totally virtual, because I would like to discuss, of course, with the whole scientific community and not just with the privileged part. Okay, so there are some benefits, of course, and I think here now people will have own views on this, but in general, typically virtual conferences are very time efficient, and you save money, which we could use as scientists for something else, to, for example, employ people. And it's possible to do it very frequently. There's no need to do it at one time. It's great to gather people, but you can also just do it over longer time, and you have a more focused exchange, for example, just on one topic per webinar. There are no visa issues. So of course it can be much more inclusive. There are some barriers, for example, language and these kind of things, where we have to find ways to maybe do translation live and so, but in general, it's much more inclusive. And it gives a good chance for scientists, climate scientists and behavior change scientists to lead by example. And there's scientific evidence. If you lead by example, you increase your impact. People are more listening to your science or to your proposed actions or policies. And you can reduce emissions drastically depending where your people come from. If you compare it to flying, you have the potential to decrease it by about 99%. Then there are some typical cons. I would like that there would be maybe some psychologist or social scientist here who do some research about that, because I think we really have to work a lot on that. And I think, for example, the human and social interaction is more challenging, but I don't think it's per se much worse. For example, some people said they prefer to write the questions. We have more gender balance in the questions, typically, if we have written questions. Time zones is a huge issue for live interaction. So that's something, the Discord channel I found very useful. So you can, for example, chat different times also and wait a little bit. In principle, for the time zone issue, I wouldn't recommend to do very long conferences, but more just have short events. And it's also challenging for people to focus over longer time. So a summary of challenges we somehow experienced during the last 1.5 years, and I must say this was pre-COVID. It's a way much more to make virtual conferencing successful. It's a lot about cultural change and priority. The technology is minor. I mean, you have to test things. There are different ways. So you have to play around with this. People have to get used to it. But often in the discussion, it's about the technology, and it's really about cultural change, behavior change, and priority. Time zones are, as I said, a challenge, and new formats, shorter but maybe continuous, could be a way to go, so that you can watch the recorded videos, for example, and just focus on a short Q&A session for half an hour. But important is we need funding strategies, because we can't build always these kind of conferences on the early careers during their PhD. And it's quite hard actually to get money for now to organize virtual conferences. And especially also because it's more harder maybe to find people to pay for that. And I see some kind of a parallel to open access publishing we could do to maybe find other ways to finance these conferences. And finally, we have to put virtual conferences on our CV. We have to advocate for that, and there should be virtual talk prizes or poster prizes for early careers. For example, one could vote for the best poster of this conference, maybe still possible, because then actually it gives the whole thing a value, and also you can put it on your CV, so that we maybe don't need this high emissions anymore for our academic careers. And the biggest challenge after Corona, I guess, will be, again, how to get busy frequent flyers on board on virtual conferences. That's very hard. It seems to be the challenge for virtual communication, because we, for example, reach a totally different audience right now than we wanted. We want to reduce the flying activities, but we basically reach a totally different community who's most of the time not flying at all. And then how can we build trust virtually? This is also something we have to do research about, or how to experience. And I have the impression that over time, and if you have social events included, there's a big chance that you can build trust. And for example, several people of this team, like Dwight, which we'll see later, I've never met in person, and it's no problem to do great projects together. So then there's a big risk of a rebound effect, because we, for example, create a lot of new contacts now across all these continents. And The risk is that we would just increase the communication, we increase collaborations, and maybe in the long term we will have more flying, because also the people who now don't fly so much will fly. And that means if we really want to keep academic emissions under control, we need strict travel policies, and we need a cultural change to ensure that we stay below 1.5, because once it's clear the scientific community can only stay below 1.5 if we change our behavior and reduce flying, because we all know that there is no technical solution for that. And the first step could be to follow, for example, a decision tree, which is a nice paper here by Lychee, where you can have like help, when should I fly, when shouldn't I fly. But finally, what we really need are travel policies on lab level, so that they are adapted to the specific needs of the projects and of the lab. But without this lab policies, which are really based on specific emission budgets, we will probably not manage to reduce these emissions. So just offering virtual conference alone will not solve that, and could even make it worse. So there's a poll now. Does your institution have a low carbon travel policy? Okay, in 5 minutes. And I think I'm also done, and so we can start the question. So I will wait a little bit with this. That's interesting. So about 50% right now say that it's planned. 38% say there's no travel policy. Then, okay, we'll end now. So 12% say that it's implemented and it's based on real emission reductions. 3% yes, implemented based on offsetting, and then planned 48%. This is amazing. And no 35%. Okay, so I think I will stop here and we can start the discussion. And what is important to say that later tonight we offer, after the closing session, we will offer a virtual mixer event where we want to discuss actually these questions together with you and try to develop strategies. So I would be very happy after 19 o'clock that people join that, and there is the Zoom link in our Discord channel. And I would ask Ibkun and Dwight to show their faces.
Xavier, you are on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Also for the co-authors that they were active in the chat and they answered some of the questions. I understand that the time that the 19 is the local time, isn't it, Soren?
Yes, we first wrote 6, but we changed that because we don't want to interfere with the closing session. But just after the closing session, we would be very happy to invite everyone to join that mixer to make sure we all know each other. And yeah.
Okay, so that I want to start explaining also your last question. In the case of ICTA, our institute also approved at the end of the last year a strategic program, and we have there an indicator about this, as you asked. So we have several questions. We can start with Graham question. Would you agree that permanent achieving of conference-generated dialogue, for example, the Discord chat, is another major plus? Or is it just too much information potentially? Is asking Graham.
I didn't get that. Could you repeat that?
Yes. Would you agree that permanent archiving of conference-generated dialogue, for example, Discord chat, so is another major plus? Or is it just too much information potentially?
I don't get it really.
Yes.
Dwight?
The thing that the Graham question is the thing that we have the chat, parallel chats, Discord channels, and so on. Do you think it's much information potentially, or is and another kind of dialogue?
Well, I find it very, very useful, and I see this conference always first as a first step to get to know two people. And I think the key is that we also make use of this conference to connect later, as you do on a normal conference, and keep the discussion offline later, and just connect with the people on Skype or do some coffee breaks later online. And so that's really important. I mean, and this Discord helps a lot to facilitate that, to find the right people. And so I find it very effective. And I would argue that on other conferences, for example, often it's much harder to get to these people you would like to talk to, especially for early careers. It's almost impossible to get a conversation with a very high-level professor at a busy conference.
I think the first question was answered by Milan, but maybe we can share with all the audience. Was made by Julia. When you talk about pros and contras, you talk about reduce 99% of the CO2 emission. Did you calculate this data? I think so, but can you explain, Milan, how do you do it?
I think Milan is not in the chat now.
But
this number I used from this first white paper of 2015, where they in California organized the first virtual conference, and they gave this number. I think it depends a lot on your specific conference, and also what you assume how many people would fly in. So that's also, I think some things are changing, but the number was I took from the literature.
Carla said that may the younger generation of academics be easier to get on board, these kind of things.
Maybe the others want to answer. Ibukun, because
Ibuku? Ibuku? Can you answer? Can you comment? Because this...
We can't hear you.
Open the micro.
Well, okay, I will. Well, I have the impression, yes, and at least for all the projects we did, we didn't. Ibukun? We didn't count. We made a lot of statistics, but we have the impression that that's much more easy to reach the young people. Actually, I don't know, Dwight.
No, open the micro, please. Microphone. If not, I want to share. I read in the chat, Anna said that also talking about the pros, also easier for people who have home care responsibility. But this is a pro. But what do you do when you're at home with the children in the same room? Or other people? It's a pro or a contra? A construction.
I just have to mention, Anna wrote an important comment. Because we are three dudes here, we are actually normally much more diverse, and Anna is in the chat. And I think this, it's hard now because of the COVID. Indeed, there are other problems that people have kids at home, which we might not have in a normal academic life, the same type. So we have to be careful to compare that. But it is important, if you have a virtual conference, that you take it as serious as if you go to a normal meeting, meaning you reserve the 3 hours, you have a quiet room, you have to block the time, and you have to, that's, I think, just a cultural thing you have to learn. Dwight?
Okay. We can thank you for all the presenters. We can follow the discussion in the forum, and we can close here the session.